Thank you all for coming here tonight. It's absolutely wonderful venue. Um, I know that from my experience, Lynn Hall Library is an asset to Belfast in so many ways, and I would encourage any of you who, if this is your first trip, to come back as often as you can and to visit it and sit in those extremely fancy chairs and cafes. Amazing. These are the ones that are amazing. Brian, I have known you for quite a few years, and I have known that literature is at the heart of your whole existence. I think we met in 1997. 10 years after that, your first novel was published. But I had no idea, no awareness of just how early this journey started. Would you be good enough to let us know just, how early this started?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on such a warm evening, and thank you to Samantha for the embarrassing opening address, and of course David. I suppose one of the things that digging out the archive did was it made me look back, which I tend not to do. I kind of find looking back makes me uncomfortable. Partly because you can see how things could have gone easily wrong at so many different points. But I kind of talk about different bits and pieces. The very first thing I remember writing, and this will be only people of a certain age will understand this reference. Whenever I was a kid, my favourite TV programme was Airwolf, which was certainly before because I'm aware people are here. It's a programme called Airwolf about a technologically advanced helicopter that someone used to fight crime in Utah or somewhere, kind of Montana. So thank you. And so whenever I was about 8, I remember writing a story called Sky Fox. Sorry, not Airwolf because that was trademark. So I wrote a story called Sky Fox about a technologically advanced helicopter in Derry, which somebody was keeping in the hollowed out hill opposite our house. And I hand wrote it. And then wanted to illustrate it with photographs. Now, Airwolf was literally every episode was just Airwolf blowing up Russian mics. So I illustrated it with photographs of explosions and I cut it on the paper. This was the 1980s. In Northern Ireland, there were no shortage of photographs of explosions. And it's the one thing that I didn't find. Actually, it's the one story that I was kind of hoping I would have found, but I didn't. And then I think I suppose you write what you see. You write what you see around you. And whenever I was at school, you were taught poetry. Particularly the Northern Irish literature that you were taught was Heaney. And a bit of Friedman because I went to St. Columns and Sir Guinea and Friedman Shakespeare. And so I started writing poetry. Doggerel, I should say, actually not poetry. There's one at the back. Anyway, and then I kind of moved to short stories and plays, and then eventually wrote my first kind of proper novel, I suppose, whenever I was about 21, 22. A novel called One So High, which I sent to one publisher. They wrote back and said, no, not for us. And I went, well, that's obviously rubbish. And nobody has ever seen it since. I still have it, and in fact I meant to bring it up tonight for the archive and forgot. But I still have the original manuscript of it. I've never done anything with it since.
I find that amazing. That's wonderful the way just in that introduction you were referencing people. And if you're talking in terms of archive and heritage, when you mentioned Heaney and you mentioned Friel, and it emphasizes the importance of what we hear and what we're taught and how we're introduced to other writers and poets, dramatists, and how, with not with everyone obviously, but with some people, they can provide that support.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you do write what you say, you write what you read. So I mean, the Sky Fox, like every writer, I would say almost every single writer, the very first thing they write is simply an imitation of something that they loved. And then as you go on, you begin to find your own voice and you begin to find your own stories and your own interests. But we all begin, we're all magpies ultimately, and we all begin by taking the thing that we loved and going, I'm going to do my version of that. And in fact, even the very first, the first Devlin, I remember where it came from. And I should mention, my becoming a crime writer rests solely with David, for a very simple reason. I didn't, unlike a number of other crime writers, I didn't read crime whenever I was younger. At all. I wasn't a crime fan. I read anything. I wasn't specifically kind of a crime reader. But my dad, when he was very young, had lost his hearing, and so when we were growing up, we watched programs that were subtitled. And in the 80s and 90s, 90s, the programs that were most often subtitled were the 8 o'clock dramas on MTV. So it was Inspector Morse and Tulsa Frost and all those, and myself and my dad would sat and watched those religiously week after week. And just after I finished in Queens, Dale's bookshop opened, and I was walking past, and there was an omnibus of Inspector Morse in the window. And I thought, I'm going to buy that for my dad. I went down and bought it, and read the 3 books myself that night, just sat up all night, went through the 3 of them, came in the next day and said to Dave, the drug pusher here, what else have you got? And he went, well, if you like that, you're going to love this. And 10 years later, Morris was dying, Robichaud looked like he was going to die, Rebus was heading towards retirement, and I decided I wanted to write a story, a character, a detective that I would be able to read. So I wrote Borderlands as a purely selfish exercise. It was to have a character whose voice I'd be quite happy to spend time with once a year, that I could write, put it on the shelf, and then the next year come back and read it again. Never wrote it with the intention of getting published or letting anybody else read it. So it was a bit of a shock. And then whenever I finished it, I thought, yeah, maybe I should try to do something with this.
You know, like so many interviews, I had a structure of what I was going to ask and where I was going to go and everything like that. And like all interviews, what you do is you listen to what they're saying, you think, oh, the hell with the structure. I'm just going to go with what we're talking about. So you mentioned Morse. Don't worry, don't get nervous. You mentioned that Morse and Colin Dexter. Wasn't Colin Dexter in touch with you?
He was, actually, it's one of the items I think that's on the back. There was a letter. Whenever I was first published, I was published by Macmillan. And I met his editor, and she had asked about, why did you start writing crime? And I told her literally what I just told you, that I kind of started through Morse. And she went, well, Colin would love to hear that. Why did you write him? Why did you write him and tell him that? He'd be delighted to hear it. So I did, and I got a lovely letter back from him a couple of weeks later, and the 2 of us were both up for a dagger. And we were meant to share a table, and then he wasn't able to go because of ill health. So he had written to say, sorry, I can't make the awards dinner, which was lovely. And my dad actually was really chuffed whenever he saw it, because I was living at home at the time. I don't know, it was delivered actually for some reason, I can't remember why, but it went to our house, our family home. So yeah, it was lovely. It was a kind of nice moment, I suppose.
Getting back to the idea of the archives, how did you feel when it all got in touch and said, we think it'd be a wonderful idea if you were to gift us or let us have your archives as a sort of as a testament to the creativity and the development of the writer?
Well, it actually started in this room, and just to kind of explain what happened, I think the first live event that I did after lockdown was a book group here who were reading The Last Crossing, and Samantha was there, and at the end of it we were kind of chatting just about work and about what Samantha does in the library, because as a writer you always want to know what people do. You love hearing about people's jobs, because there's a fairly good chance you can use it at some stage in the story. And people like talking about their work as well. So Samantha was chatting about archives, and it's fascinating, it's really interesting. And just as I was leaving, she said, and you need to start thinking about your archive. And I spiraled into a panic attack on the way home. And I kind of thought, damn, look, I'm dying. I'm 50 in January, and I was like, look, like, I'm thinking, does she know something? I actually was going, I went to Tanya and said, Dave, look unwell. I feel unwell. I kind of feel, I'm talking about an archive. So it freaked me out, to be totally honest. And that then, once that slightly abated, I then had a feeling of why would anyone want to look at anything that I had? And that's still, I have to say, that's still how I feel. I kind of look at that stuff up there going, yeah, it's personally, it's interesting, but you know, it's embarrassing, I suppose. It's a huge honour. I am massively honoured and massively humbled, and having read Michael McClaverty whenever I was growing up, to kind of be in an archive that Michael McClaverty is a real honour. But yeah, it spiraled me into panic, I think, at the first instance. And then whenever I was going through stuff, I realised I had to redact some of the notebooks, because my notebooks are chaotic, like this interview, like my speaking style. They're a bit chaotic, and in the middle of notes about stories, there'll be a shopping list, or somebody's phone number, or the cost of what my car was to get fixed. And so I kind of had to remove some pages of more personal detail. So yeah, that was kind of interesting as well, this experience.
Well, just to reassure you, Samantha was very keen on saying it's a living archive, okay? So they're expecting more.
I hope so.
Because I was asking, and I found this fascinating. They have 11 boxes.
Yeah, do you know that TV show, UK's Worst Order? That was there. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff in there. I tend not to dump things. And again, unfinished books, there's a few unfinished Devlins that are in there, and stories. And kind of what you find quite early on is that if you write something and you don't use it or it doesn't work, you never throw it away, because at some stage it's going to click. At some stage you'll go, that's now the place for this. I remember just after Borderlands came out, I was at Mass one Sunday morning, and this was in Donegal, and as I was coming out, this man came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you the writer?" And I kind of went, "Yeah." And he said, "I have a story for you," which kind of fills you with dread, because quite often it's either kind of somebody trying to sell a store, or it's an anecdote, and then they go, "So you have to use that." But he said, "I have a story for you. Do you know that the net fishermen aren't allowed to get licenses above the bridge?" That was it. And I went, "Right, okay." And he said, "But rod fishermen can have as many as they want." Oh, okay, right. So you put that in a book. And I walked off. And I kind of went, right, okay, never, obviously not going to use that. And then about 5 years later, I was writing the Nameless Dead, about a body that washes up on the island in the middle of the thaw, and is discovered by a fisherman. And I kind of went, he's a net fisherman, because they're not allowed to fish above the bridge, they have to fish below the bridge. And so I included that detail, and at one point he says to the detective, "Do you know the rodmen were allowed to make licenses and go?" So, I mean, I don't know if he ever read it, but you do, you kind of, stuff clicks, stuff finds a home.
I have an image of some PhD student from some college somewhere in the United States going to do a research project on crime fiction from this part of the world, and realizing the significance and the importance of the difference between rod and net fishing.
The weird thing is, I remember with Little Girl Lost, there's a story in Little Girl Lost. Whenever we were kids, so Hen Woods is very near where we grew up. It's this ancient woodland, and we spent most of our childhood on it, not in a feral way, not in an abandoned by our parents way, but just, you kind of, it was in those days where they just said, "Go on out and play," and you headed off and you arrived back when you were hungry or it was dark. And we used to take a walk up through Hen Woods, and there was a massive hollow in the middle of the woods, and I remember when I was a kid, my dad saying to us, "That's the elephant's grave." And we were like, "Why?" Now, when I think about it, it shouldn't have been a hollow, it should actually have been a mound. But he said, "Yes, that's the elephant's grave." And he said there was a circus in Derry in the 50s, and an elephant died, and they didn't know what to do with it, so they brought it out here and they buried it in the woods. So that's great. Now, that was a story we were told when we were kids, and of course you're fascinated by that. And then when I was writing Little Girl Lost, Lucy is going through the woods, and she comments to somebody about the elephant's grave, and basically repeats that story. And I got an email from a PhD student in America a couple of years later saying, I loved the metaphor of the elephant's grave. It added so much to the story. And I hadn't the heart to write back and say, there is no metaphor. The weird thing was when the book then, once the book came out, my dad read it, and he said to me, where did you get that story about the elephant's grave? That was fantastic. So you told me that? Well, I never told you that story. I have no idea what you're talking about. So things take their own meaning. People will say stuff, and that's what literature is. And everybody brings themselves to it, and I suppose projects themselves onto it. And that's how it should be.
You constantly reference the idea of experiencing your existence of living in Derry and your younger life and how it's affected or sort of formatted and work towards your writing and your ideas. How important is it for you coming from that part of the world and sort of wanting to tell the tale not just of the people there, but the environment and the history and the situation?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's every story needs to be told, and everywhere is important in some way. That's the Kavanagh poem epic. Homer made the Iliad such a local roy as not the line, and there is a resistance to stories from here, whether we like it or not. And as writers from here, we know that, and you will know that as a bookseller. There is a resistance to stories from Northern Ireland because people think they know what they're going to get. And people assume that they already know the story, or else feel that they have heard the story so often that there's nothing new to hear. And I mean, Stuart, who is here, Stuart Neville, wrote a really good piece last year whenever he wrote House of Ashes, which is superb, by the way, arguing just that, kind of saying, why are our stories not the equal of anybody else's? Why are we told we shouldn't tell our stories, but you would never say that to anybody else? And so it is, like, it's a privilege to tell your story at all. It's a privilege, and to have it read is a privilege, but it can be frustrating, and I think we all feel this. I think it can be frustrating that internationally or nationally there is a resistance to stories from Northern Ireland.
And I think it's the fact that we're sitting here with your archive on display and more being catalogued and put in place, that when you are going to be talking about a situation that we have all experienced here over the last 30, 40, 50 years, that you should be trying to do it with a sense of understanding, nuance, sympathy, and care for the whole existence. And I think quite often what happens is that when people see the word a novel or a crime novel set in Northern Ireland, they automatically assume that it is not universal in its message.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there is a very obvious bias. I mean, we're kind of heading off maybe in a direction we shouldn't, but I remember a couple of years back, the Sunday Times did the most 100 influential crime novels of the century. And the only book that they had on it about Northern Ireland was Harry's Game. And they had the definitive story of the Troubles. Now, Harry's Game was written in 1974, I think, and they claim it's the definitive story of the Troubles. I mean, I would say every single writer in Northern Ireland would disagree with that, and it's a fine read for what it is. But to say that it's the definitive story of something which continued for another 25 years, not entirely sure I'm convinced by that. And that is a fairly common, I think, common experience for quite a number of us.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, we could sit here and talk about all of your work. We'd be here for a long time, which would be fine.
It's a hot evening, possibly not.
It is. But I want to, touch on the point that Samantha was talking about, the last crossing, which I think for many people, it's not a series novel, it's a standalone, but it encapsulates the whole complex, troubled messiness of everything that was involved with the Troubles, and does it in such a beautiful way. And I would like to make a point that there is a person at the back of the room who was responsible for publishing that book and getting it out there in 2020. And I mean, I think it was an amazing novel, an amazing book about the Troubles, and probably one of the best books about the Troubles in the last 30 years. Was it a different or a difficult book to write?
Yeah, it was very easy and very difficult simultaneously. So the last crossing, if for anyone who doesn't know, I had written a series of novels with a guard, Ben Devlin, and then I wrote a series of novels with a PSI officer, Lucy Black, and kind of got to a point where I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I remember reading a story about one of the disappeared who was located. And it was in the BBC News, it was on the BBC website. And it said that it was believed that the 3 people who had been responsible for this person's death had travelled to where the body had been buried in order to locate it so that the body could be returned to the family. 30 years after the killing. And I remember immediately going, what would that day have been like? Meeting people that you haven't seen in 30 years, who all shared this one moment where you committed the greatest breach in nature. How do you come back from that? What happens to you as a result of it? And so the story is about 3 members of the terror cell who meet and take the ferry across to Scotland to go to Woodland just outside Glasgow to see if they can remember where they buried the 4th member of their cell, whom they'd executed 30 years earlier. And it's about how each of them has dealt with what happened. So one of them believes that his life has been blighted by what he did. Things just have gone badly for him, and he believes that that is his punishment. One of them has compartmentalized it and has just said to herself, that was a different person. That's not me. I'm now a mother and a wife, and the person that did that was not me. That was 20-year-old someone else. And then one of them is unapologetic, and in actual fact is still quite angry and feels that they didn't kill the right person. And so the book alternates between past and present. And does this thing that I had tried to do a couple of times. If anyone has read it, in order to kind of smooth the movement between past and present, the final word of one chapter in the past becomes the first word of the next chapter in the present. And so it kind of moves. It's a thing called concatenation, which I remember being taught in Queen's. It was used as this beautiful medieval poem called Cairn, about a father who has lost his daughter who dreams of her. And the last line of each stanza is the first line of the next, and creates a string of pairs. And I always wanted to do it, and I had tried doing it in Little Dear Lost. So the original draft of Little Dear Lost had one narrative, which was a police officer, and then the second narrative, which was the child who was missing. And they were connected in that kind of concatenating way. And I got about 3/4 of the way through the book and just felt like a wall. And sat for about 3 months looking at it, going, I have no idea how to finish this. I have no idea where this book's going. And eventually, I had to admit to myself that the problem was that the child's narrative was going to give away information too early, which would have spoiled the police officer's narrative. And so I ended up just having to cut out about 40,000 words and just remove the second narrative completely. And then finished the book in about 3 weeks. And it's a much better book for it. But I'd always wanted to use that concatenating idea, and eventually with the last crossing it fitted.
It just shows you that a good idea will always come through.
Yeah, or you just make so many, you don't want to waste them. You know, it's like small change in your pocket, you kind of want to hold on to them.
I'm going to go back into your deep dark past now. Poems, plays, short stories. You mentioned to me earlier that there was sort of a generational movement in that development. That, you know, he wrote stories at a certain age, poems at another age, and then moved on to plays, and I should add musicals.
Yeah, musical. There you go.
It's down there as well, is it?
Thankfully, I didn't write any of the music because it would have been.
I think we should revisit that. I think it'd be perfect.
Andrew Lloyd Webber, obviously, is waiting for my musical. It was that kind of thing, I suppose. I wrote poems whenever I was, like I started off with writing Skyfox, obviously, I wrote stories when I was a kid, and then wrote poems because I thought that was a sophisticated thing to do.
When you were a teenager?
When you were a teenager and you're trying to attract girls, and you weirdly think poetry's going to do it. Obviously it doesn't. So yeah, I wrote quite and it was a big fan of Yeats.
Well, he had a lot of it.
I had a lot of love poetry, and obsession and all that kind of stuff. And then the short stories, I started listening to Tom Waits. And Tom Waits' music is, each of his songs is a short story in itself.
Well, each thing, he quite often is an art form of telling a story to music.
Yeah, totally. One of the earliest stories there was actually called Closing Time after the first album, which I think is in the archive as well, possibly. But the stories didn't go anywhere. They weren't really stories. They were kind of just snapshots of things. And then, as I say, I wrote One So High when I was about 21, just after I finished my degree. And it was a strange book. I had been reading Dracula, and I had read The Silence of the Lambs. And so it's a book and I'd done Hamlet, obviously, when I was at school. And so it's a book about two psychiatrists, where one is interviewing the other to try to work out if he's actually mad or just pretending to be. So it's a kind of mashup of those three books. But I needed somewhere to set it. It was about an hour and a half from London, so I set it in Reading. And I have never been in Reading in my life. Why I chose to set a book in Reading, I have no idea. But again, it was more to see if I could. I think that's what it was about. It was about trying to see, could I work out an idea that would sustain kind of 180,000 words. And I think really that's what your first book is always about. It's about trying to see, does it have legs? And then as your second book, you write just to see if you can do it twice. And it's only with the third one that you kind of start to go, right, now I need to think about how I'm crafting this. Now I know that I can do it. Now I need to look at how I'm doing it. And so the books, hopefully each book has been a reaction to the one that has gone before, and hopefully a step up from the one that has gone before.
You know, you're saying this in a very matter-of-fact way, but the reality is that, you know, for you as a writer to sit down and think through all of those processes, to do all that work, to be disciplined enough to want to continue with it, knowing that there may not be for want of a better term, an end result, i.e. ending up with the publisher, shows, you know, a steadfast determination that I think a lot of us just would not have.
Obstinacy, I think is what you're looking for. Stubbornness, I believe is something I followed with yeah, I know you're right, but I mean, again, I don't know any writer who writes to get published, if I'm totally honest. And I think if that's what your goal is, I think if you sit down to write a book going, this is going to be published and I'm going to be rich, possibly, chances are it's not going to be published and you certainly aren't going to be rich. If your only motivation has been, I'm going to be rich. I mean, ultimately, it's about you have a story that you want to tell, and I write to work out how I feel about things, which seems a little bit counterintuitive. You would imagine that you write once you know how you feel about something, you write about it. I'm the opposite. I tend to kind of work out my feelings. So after my dad passed away, I hadn't written a Devlin book in 9 years. The last Devlin had been 2012. And whenever my dad died, I wanted to write about him. I wanted to write about, not just about him, but I didn't want to write about him because it was great and he was very quiet and shy and nobody really knew him. But I also wanted to write about the experience of grief. And so I kind of, as soon as I started writing the book, it was Devlin's voice straight away. And it could only have been Devlin's voice. And so I wrote Blood Ties as a way of processing how I felt in a safe way, because that's what crime fiction is anyway. Crime fiction is kind of experiencing emotions with a degree of safety. So you kind of experience fear or terror or whatever. It's that kind of cathartic idea. It is, to my mind, the modern version of Greek tragedy, the modern version of tragedy, that we experience these negative emotions safely, and also knowing that they will be resolved. And thereby we are kind of cleansed or purged of those fears. And if you look at the rise of true crime, I mean, if you look at Serial, the podcast here, 300 million people have listened to it. The rise of true crime, I think, is a real reflection of that. But from a writer's point of view, it's exactly the same. It is cathartic. It is the way to write your feelings and work out how you feel. And by the end of the book, normally I feel a bit more resolved with things than I did at the start. So it's a form of therapy that people then pay to share, and which is kind of an interesting experience. But it is, writing is therapy.
Samantha very kindly mentioned an essay that we written that was published in a collection called Impermanence. And that's also a departure, I suppose, in your writing. It was a piece about the idea of the vagaries and the impermanence of our existence. How important was that for me to get that message out in that essay?
Yeah, and again, it was beautifully published, by the way, by Alibis. This was a collection that Neil Higgerty edited with the Centre Culturel de Les in Paris. And they commissioned 12 writers to write on the theme of impermanence, and it was just that. You could write whatever you wanted, but it had to be 15 minutes long, because the original idea was that we would all record it, and there wouldn't be a written version of it, it would just be recorded, and would kind of play spectrally somewhere in Paris, which is quite a nice concept. But I'm glad that it is in print, and that it is kind of a bit more form. And I suppose I was, as I kind of had lost my dad. Our oldest son was heading off to university. You become very aware of things changing. And particularly when you're a parent, for a long time things don't change. Whenever your kids are young and they're at primary school seems to go on forever. It's just nativities and packed lunches and Christmas plays and whatever else, sports days. And then once they get to secondary school, it speeds up very, very, very quickly. And secondary school seems to last about 6 months. And around the time that I was writing that, you kind of got that sense, I got that sense of things changing and things shifting. And whenever he said to me, do you want to write an essay called Impermanence? I've been waiting to write an essay on impermanence. And again, it was a lovely thing to write, and it kind of brought up very nice memories. Like we lived quite close to the border, and we used to go backwards and forwards. So when you're in Derry on the weekends, you went to Belfast, because that was just where you went on a Sunday afternoon for a run, even though there was no running involved because you were sitting in the car. And added to that was the fact that my mum, whenever we were growing up, had a real predilection for chef sauce, which is a specific type of brownie sauce that was only available in the Republic at that stage. So we used to go to Buncran on Sunday to stockpile chef sauce, and you had to drive through a military bunker in order to achieve this. And the squad had put in, said to my dad, what are you doing? My dad was sitting with a pipe in his mouth. We'd all be choking on smoke. There were only 5 seats and there were 6 of us, so I was rolling around in the foot because I was the youngest and the most rollable because of my size. And my dad would be going, yeah, we're going to buy sauce. And the squad would be like, yeah, get out of the car. Thinking he was being cheeky. And then you would drive him back up and he would put you back in. Where are you coming from? My dad would hold up a bag with 5 bottles of chef sauce. And all right, okay, you were buying sauce, on you go. And that actually was the starting point for the essay. And that the 5 minutes that we got as kids where they kind of go, right, get out of the car and would run. And then you would get out onto the beach and you'd run for about 5 minutes to get rid of all your energy, and then you'd climb back into the boot of the car and roll your way back to there. But it was lovely, you know, it was really nice. And I remember when I was writing it, my dad smoked Congo or long pot tobacco. And I couldn't remember the tobacco, but I remember the smell. It was that kind of Proustian moment of the smell, very real. And I texted my brothers and sister and said, what was the name of the tobacco? It's something I could smell it. And I can see it, and I know what the packet looks like. And both of them straight away, it was Joe and Cardinal, both instantly came back with it Congo long cut. And so that's in the essay. And those details are lovely. You know, I mean, they're nice, they kind of keep people alive, they keep memories alive.
And I think it goes back to this idea of an archive and a collection. that allows us and people who are going to see it to look into the, what is important in the creativity of writing and what is important. The end result is always on the pages in the book, but there's so much more to it than that. And I think that's what a living archive is allowing us to see, is that every little element of what you've done, put down on paper, whether you love it or not, is part of that process.
Yeah, and you do love it all, even the rubbish stuff. I mean, you kind of read the rubbish stuff and you once and blush and then kind of go, yeah, but that was me. And I remember where I was when I wrote that. I remember the space that I was in when I wrote that. And it's kind of part of who I am. And so it is, like it is, to write is a privilege, and to be published is a privilege. And thus the idea of the archive is an absolute privilege. But it is, it's strange because writers tend to be quite introverted and quite personal, and then this part of it, the very public part of it, is a totally different aspect of writing. You've got the writing, which is the sitting in your room making stuff up, and then you've got the writing presenting yourself to the public, and that's quite exposing, I suppose. So even when I was coming up tonight, I was going to wonder what it was. I wonder how bad it is. The only thing is my handwriting is so appalling that you'll have no chance to work out whatever the notebooks say. But yeah, I mean, it's a real privilege.
I'm just going to ask one more thing, and then I'm going to open it up for about 10 minutes of questions. I had this surreal thought that, you talk about the unpublished novels and the things that you have here. I had this surreal thought of Brian McGilloway walking in the library to go to his own archive to do some research for a new book because an idea has sprung in his head. And he thought, I know where that is. Oh, it's in the bloody Law Library. I have to go and get it.
Well, in fairness, one of the things I did ask about was if I need my thing back, can I get it back? So yeah, of course it's yours. Yeah, I suspect that will be the only person accessing it. I'll hardly be finding it that way. Yeah, things reappear. It's strange. I found stories, and I found one story in particular that I had written, I think it was about 22, 23, and I discovered that I had used an entire paragraph of it in the book, almost word for word, despite the fact that I had forgotten my written it. About 10 years later, and it obviously was there somewhere, and again, it's that idea of everything finds its place. But it was strange, and I kind of compared it to him, and thought that's a bit weird. But I hadn't looked at the stories in so long. But there was one paragraph about crows. And even the crows thing, there tend to be crows in all of my books, because for him, wherever we are, is the air expectation of crow. And there were crows every night whenever we were kids. There was just this cacophony of crows. I know it's a murder of crows, but they were loud. And they tend to feature in the books quite a bit too, actually. So, yeah, I hadn't really thought. And this is the strange thing with this. It does make you reflect on your own work, which is discomforting and nice at the same time.
That's life.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question they would like to ask, or is there anyone who would like to ask? There's someone here at the front.
Yes.
We just pipeline.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, are you one of those writers that hasn't got down garden where you go into town or have an attic like Susan Sweeney or what?
So the question is for the people. The question was, do I have a hut or an attic that I write in? I have a study that I write in, but I actually end up writing in the kitchen more often, just because there's a bit more light on it. When the kids were younger, it was easier because they went to their bed early. So I could kind of go and write then. This isn't a criticism, but as they have got older, they have stayed up later, frequently later than me. And so I tend to go to cafes actually quite a bit. I'll take a laptop and go and sit in the cafe. I know some people who need quiet to work. I actually quite like background noise, but as long as I can't really hear it. So I tend to go to cafes and then I'll put on music with no lyrics. And the music will normally set the tone for the book. and then just write for about an hour and a half. And that process kind of comes from, again, whenever I first started writing the crime novels, I was also teaching at the time. So I generally had about an hour and a half a day when I could write, and that was it. And so I got very good at making use of the full hour and a half. And I would write a chapter in an hour and a half, and I would normally aim for about 1,000, 1,500 words. And if I got that done every day and got my hour and a half every day, that was enough. And I remember whenever I first took out from teaching, the first kind of 6 months I found quite strange, because I took off and I thought, I am going to write so much. I'm going to be 6 books out this year. And I still found that once I had done my hour and a half, I was kind of going, right, well, that's the itch scratched. I have nothing else to write now today, that's me done. So yeah, various places, a study, kitchen, cafe, wherever I could find. So yeah.
Anyone? Yes.
So,
despite your success, do you fear rejection?
always. Yeah, I suppose you get used to it. One of the things that's in my archive, so weird saying it. That's the first time I've said my archive, and I feel like I'm chewed for saying it straight away. But sorry, I apologise. One of the things that's in the archive in the Manor Library are the rejection letters that I got for Borderlands, as well as the acceptance email, which I think is actually on display at the back. I'm glad I didn't put the rejection letters. They're significantly more of them. But you kind of, at the start, you take it personally. And then you realise as you get to know editors and agents, and David, my agent's very, very good. I come over from London, bless him, for this evening. But it's very good at whenever I kind of started going, look, when an editor turns something down, it's not personal. It's just, they might have a book similar to yours already kind of planned, or they might already have, as was the case whenever I was first accepted. So this is my chaotic thinking again. Whenever I was first accepted for publication, Tartan Noir was the big thing. Ian Rankin was selling 1 in every 10 books or something in the UK. And every publisher believed that Irish noir was going to be the next thing. And every publisher wanted an Irish writer on the books. And then once you got them, that was it. It was kind of like, you're our Irish writer, and then pat you on the head. And so each of us got into different publishers, and then that was it. It's kind of like, right, the bridge is pulled up now. We have enough Irish writers here, really no more. But yeah, look, you write something, you do the best that you can. Not everybody's going to love it. When I was first published, I read Amazon reviews and Goodreads reviews religiously. I'd say now it's about 10 years since I last looked at any of them. Because that way madness lies, it's not going to do you any good. If there's a problem with the book, you'll know it yourself anyway. Or you'll have a very good agent or a very good editor who will say to you, this hasn't worked. And if the book is going well, then you'll know it's going well because readers will tell you it's going well. So maybe they're not reading Amazon reviews as I am actually still afraid of rejection, but I don't think so. No, I think you get a thick skin and you just accept that that's part of the business, and you just get on with it and do your best.
Brian, do you fear AI taking over everybody?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Yeah, I mean it's a very clear threat, particularly because crime novels have a particular pattern. But to be totally honest, even before AI, there was a lot of copycat stuff being done anyway. As soon as one title took off and did really well, you could be guaranteed that within 6 months, the supermarkets would be flooded with very similar books with very similar titles, with very similar covers. And trying to predict what's going to work is madness. The books that do really well are the books you don't expect that are going to do really well. And the books that you love most are the ones that break the patterns, that don't replicate the patterns. And I suppose for me, the crime novels that I love aren't about plot, they're about character, they're about people. And you know yourself instinctively when you read a book where somebody does something because the plot required it. You see it in the reader. And we've all had that. We've all read books where you're going, you wouldn't do that. That simply is not in keeping with what that character would do.
Or worse, you see it coming and you're disappointed. You know?
Yeah, it happens and you go, all right, okay. And the great books are the books where the characters do things you don't expect. And I suspect that AI will struggle with that a little bit. The flip side of it, of course, is so this is this argument that's going on with the writer's strike in America at the moment about the use of AI to produce scripts for TV. I think that is probably a much bigger threat in the short term. But I don't know. I mean, you write to not feel alone, if that makes sense. And even, I mean, I have a fantastic family, surrounded by people all the time, but we all ultimately have a fear that we're alone. And writing is a way to fight that. That you're kind of, it's your shout into the abyss and the hope that somebody's going to hear it. And I think that's why we read as well. We read so that we can go, yes, that's that. I felt that. I know what that is. And I'm not entirely convinced that I'll ever read anything by Peculier that will make me go, yes, you've seen into my soul. I see that with human writing constantly. So while I am worried about it in practical terms, from an artistic point of view, I don't think it'll ever match the depth of our own humanity.
Yeah, from a bookseller, I can just imagine the joy of getting a marketing campaign on an AI book trying to sell it. You know, it's just, I mean, I know it will come, I know it will come, but rest assured, this bookshop won't be bad.
Taking a stand against AI.
Any other questions, folks?
Stuart, that was really a difficult one. Spell chrysanthemum.
I as quite a few writers I know struggles with this with pleasure because you can't turn the editor off in your head when you're reading. But thinking with you from your educational background and teaching English literature and the academic work you're doing now, how do you stop that editor in your head encroaching when you're reading pleasure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Do you have an editor in your head when you're reading? If you write crime, it's very difficult to read crime and not go, yeah, probably I would have done that differently. I possibly am reading less crime than I used to, partly because I'm afraid that I'll steal ideas from somebody, and partly so I have left teaching at Queen's now doing a PhD, and the topic is epistolary writing. So I'm reading an awful lot of epistolary stuff at the moment. And that is sufficiently different from my own writing that I don't even, that doesn't come into it. I'm just able to read it and enjoy it. And it's just, you know yourself, I mean, you read something great and you're just going, oh, that's amazing. I wish I'd written that, but if I'd written it, it wouldn't have been amazing. So that's, you're still able to enjoy the good stuff and go, that's fantastic, I can admire that. But yeah, there is some stuff that you read where you're going, oh, no, wouldn't have done that. That's not how that works. But I remember pulling, again, totally off topic. Whenever Borderlands, when I wrote Borderlands, I said earlier it was a selfish exercise. So I did no research for it at all. I just wrote it off the top of my head. And then whenever I heard it was going to be published, I took a panic and I thought I would need to start researching retrospectively. So I went to the local Garda station. I told this story before. I went to the Garda station. We had been painting in the back garden. We painted our fence medium oak for on-seat medium oak, which when it dries on a white t-shirt looks suspiciously like blood. And I went into the Garda station, not from Lifford, kind of went in and said, oh, here, listen, I've written a book set in this station. I have some questions, would you mind? And the guy kind of smirked away the eyebrow on my head. So I asked things like, what colour is crime scene tape? Like really basic stuff that I probably should know. But I said to him, the last question I had was about, where do you keep your guns? Assuming that he wouldn't answer. And he kind of looked at me and he went, there's a closet around the corner. And the key just hangs it underneath the desk here. Now, I don't know if that's true. I actually suspect it might be. But it's been in every book since, so in the Devlin books, that's where they are. But I had done all this research, and then whenever the book came out, there was a friend of mine whose wife is a pathologist, and she came up to me in the line at the signing, and she just looked at me and shook her head, said, "Popcorn in the body after 12 hours." And just walked on. Okay.
I have an image of a bunch of guards in different ones. Gallows Lane. He thinks he knows where the guns are.
There's a story about guards in Humber, know where the guns are. That's a different thing entirely. And that's what it for broadcasts.
Maybe it'll go in the archive. Folks, anyone else with a question?
Hi, do you ever struggle with motivation? So actually, you mentioned earlier you're writing a story and you hit a wall when writing it. Does that stop you writing? Do you just write through?
Different things. It's a very, very good question. So it's about motivation and writer's block. With the last crossing, actually, we were talking about earlier, I hit a wall quite early on. I kind of got to about 30,000 words on it. And couldn't see a way forward, and began to doubt whether it was worth telling. And I had kind of people who were very good friends who were saying to me, "You need to stop writing about Northern Ireland. Why do you keep writing about it? You write about somewhere else, nobody wants to read it." And they meant it in a really kind way. Like they were kind of, this was advice, it wasn't criticism. And I think it was possibly Stuart again who mentioned morning pages to me. Which was this idea that when you're struggling to get started writing again, you write 3 pages every morning when you get up. Not of your book, just of anything. So you just sit down with a notebook and you write 3 pages off the top of your head, a stream of consciousness. And it's meant to kind of get you trained back into sitting down and writing first thing in the morning. And I did. And I found, again, as part of the kind of preparation for the archive, I found the notebook that I had used for morning pages. And I think I did about 52 days of 3 pages every day. And the first 4 or 5, it's not in the archive yet, and there's a very good reason for that. The first 4 or 5 days were totally personal. So it was about me, it was about how I was feeling about writing, it was about school, it was personal stuff. And then I think on day 4, the first line on day 4 is, "Tony is in my head," who became the first of the central character of the last crossing. And over the rest of the notebook, it's just me, almost by stream of consciousness, going through who this person is and what he's thinking about and what's motivating him. And it was really, I got to day 52, and then on day 53 when I woke up, I thought, "No, hell, I'm going to write the book." And it got me going again. There are periods when you try to write through it, and generally speaking, like Tanya, my wife, will know, she will read 30 stuff that I've written, and she normally knows when I kind of hit a wall and run out of story, because she'll go, "That chapter's not great, nothing happens on it." And when you go back, you kind of realise, yeah, that is actually, the day that I was writing that was the day where I was going, "I have no idea what I'm writing here." And you tread water, but the first draft of everything is the vomit draft. It's when you get everything out of your head. The craft of being a writer is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever number of drafts it takes. And a lot of stuff that you put in, you cut back out again because it doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't, to be honest, it hasn't been easier. I thought mistakenly that as I got on, I would find writing easier. I don't. Partly it's because you use up an awful lot of your ideas, especially with your first, because with your first you think it's the only one you're ever going to get published. So every idea you've ever had, you stick in there. And then whenever it's published, you go, "Oh, I should have saved a couple of those to the second one." But yeah, there are different approaches. Some people will say write through it. Some people will say walk away from it. Generally, I go out for a walk and stick on headphones just. But morning pages definitely work. That idea of just every day writing whatever's in your head until you feel the impulse. Because that's what it is. Writing's a compulsion. It's an impulse. It's not that's the simplest way to describe it. You wake up and you are compelled to sit down and tell a story. And if you don't, you're irritable and out of sorts. And then if you're lucky, you'll have a partner who goes, "You need to go and write. Go and get out." And you go and you start writing, and that works. Sorry, yes.
Sorry, I noticed you said there your thief can have to tell a story. You know, Barbara Cartman wrote her books by dictating them.
Yeah.
But I mean, I wonder if you ever tried that?
Dictation?
Into taping yourself and then writing it afterwards.
I do. My worry with dictation software is my accent. God only knows what it would look like by the time I'm finished. I can only guess what the subtitles up there are like based on what I'm saying.
That's what it looked like.
Yeah, the solar panels. I can only guess what the solar panels are. Okay. That's why. That's why it is.
So fashion tape recorder, and then you wouldn't have artificial intelligence getting in the way.
Yeah, well, what I actually do, I use notes on my phone. So if I'm out walking, and I'm kind of thinking through an idea, I will record it on the kind of notes on my phone. And to be honest, I've never ever had to listen to them back, because simply the process of saying them out loud kind of reinforces them enough for you that whenever you go home, you remember what they are and then you jot them down in the notebook. But I do use notes for ideas as I'm out walking, but dictation software, I think as I write. And I worry that I would kind of talk through something and then go, no, that's all rubbish. And then you have to kind of try to work out how far back you have to go. So no, I like typing because it gives me a chance to think as I'm working. And as I say, the accents were just nice. Yeah, again.
I'd forgotten all about that. I wonder if we swear about that.
Not if I say.
Yeah, I think Jeff can make it doing the right thing, but we shall. Folks, any other questions? Okay. Oh,
Quick one.
another bloody author.
Have you not heard me? I am never quick. There's a quick question, but never a quick answer.
What's the music all about?
The musical is about the prodigal son. So where this came from, whenever I was teaching in St. Columns, I got kind of caught into directing the school's musicals for a couple of years. And then one year, myself and the two music teachers in school, we were trying to work out what to do. I kind of here, why don't we just write our own for the crack, see what happens? And we sat and what a crack come up as
I was just checking what I said.
Tracks with it. So we sat down and we went, what are musicals based on? Oh, they're all based on religious stories. Joseph and the multicolored, whatever, goat and all that kind of stuff. So we came up with the idea of doing kind of modern version of The Prodigal Son. My lyrics are heavily influenced by Tom Waits, which is really weird for a Catholic grammar school in Derry. It really wasn't what they were expecting. The music is really good. The lyrics are a bit weird, but it has my favourite line of all time, which is there were a group of transvestite prostitutes, and the line was "Eat, drink, and be merry," M-A-R-Y. And then in the next verse it becomes "and buy merry," and the clerics in charge of the school didn't notice it until it went into performance. And then there were some questions had to be answered afterwards. But yeah, so it's
You're doing a PhD.
so yeah, that's what it was about. It was called The Son's Return, and in actual fact, there's some nice songs in it from a musical point of view. And one of the people who performed in it, Maria Carmen, went on and did Celtic Woman, and is a superb singer, a really brilliant singer, and I think that was one of her first shows. So I'm not taking any credit at all for her singing. So yeah, that's what it's about. The script of it is up there. Weird. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. Look, folks, can I just say a massive thank you to everyone? I know I've probably spoken much longer than I was meant to. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Thank you to the London Hall Library for such a kind invitation. Once I got past my panic. And a massive thank you to two people who have been such stalwarts for me David Hadley, who runs Goldsboro Books in London and is my agent. David, whenever Borderlands came out, bought almost the entire first print run of Borderlands because he believed in it so much, and has had my back ever since, to the point that he's come over this evening. And I wouldn't be a crime writer without David Torrans. And can I also I have to mention Steve and Stuart, who, along with David, came to my dad's funeral, who are here tonight, who've been doing all the important stuff, so thank you very much.